Hi, my name is Brian Williams, founder of Perspectivity, here to share with you the top 7 problems we see as it relates to effective communication and business or sales presentations. Now, this list was created from my experience in corporate America and 20 years of traveling to 10 plus countries doing global pre-sale. So I had a team of about 30 people in 4 countries. Our job was to educate the 400 global sales team leaders on the new products that we had acquired through the acquisitions that we had recently made in Silicon Valley. In addition to that, I always wanted to be number 1 in the world at something. So I pursued the world championships in public speaking, and I made it all the way to the world semifinals in my first attempt. So I had a lot of coaching, a lot of training during that time. And so I've taken those experiences and I've used it to create this presentation. Now, of course, this list was created from my just working with CEOs and large and small companies as well. And what you'll find are these 7 appear in most business presentations. And then I'll also share with you solutions to those very problems. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's not all about you. That's the very first problem we see, or the most popular problem we see with presentations, is this very self-centered, self-focused. Like most business presentations start with what? The company logo and their history and how long they've been in business and why they're so great. Guess what? Your audience can get all of that information from your website. And if they can't find it there, they'll find it on your LinkedIn profile or your Facebook profile. So if you're still starting your presentations with company information, that's very 1980s, right? Because no one really cares also. I mean, they're here to find out how you're going to help them, how you're going to build their business or solve their problems or issues or whatever that might be. So remember, it's not all about you. Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, said it best. It's not all about you. We want you to focus on the audience. And that is much easier said than it is done. In fact, we will coach clients on how to get away from this problem, and they'll stand up before the audience, even in rehearsals, and you'll see the problem surface over and over again. Why? Because it's a major issue. It's just a major problem. We see it all over the world. Why? Because it's not a presentation problem. It's a human psychology problem. Because most of us love ourselves. We like our voice and what we do, and so therefore we overwhelm people typically with too much information, and it doesn't matter what part of the world that you're in. I've seen it in Taiwan, China, Singapore, Beijing, just different parts of the world. We see the same problem. Now, before we move any further, you're probably wondering, am I guilty of this? Is that what I'm guilty of? Do I do that? Here's a test. It's a 6-part test, and if you answer 1, then you are guilty of being a self-centered or self-focused speaker. And that, when I say by self-centered, that means focusing on yourself, your product, your service, or your company, and therefore ignoring your audience. Let's take a look. First one we see are some glasses or spectacles. So here's the point. Are you presenting and speaking from your perspective, the way you see things, or from your audience's perspective? Very important to keep in mind, because it's so natural to begin speaking in your own perspective. If you're speaking in your own perspective, in due time you will lose your audience, because they're there for who? Themselves. So if all you're talking about is yourself or your company, product or service, is speaking from your own perspective, chances are they're going to disconnect and eventually disengage. Second, we see the loudspeaker. Now, most people who are guilty of this problem usually have been told by now, and usually have been told many times, probably very loudly, you're a bit self-centered, you always speak from your own perspective, you're not a great listener. These are some signs that you're probably a self-centered or self-focused speaker, meaning you ignore your audience. Or perhaps you might be one that always speaks from a positive perspective, meaning you only share the accolades and the awards and the best parts of your product or your service in your company, which would make sense. However, sharing some humility goes a really long way. Why? Because you're speaking to humans. And we typically emotionally connect with people when we share some vulnerabilities. In fact, I'll share one with you right now. I earlier stated that I wanted to be number one in the world in something, and I eventually did, because as I was pursuing the world championships, due to some technicality that I wasn't even aware of, it didn't even take place on stage, but I was eventually disqualified. So I never actually made it to the world championships. And it turns out that I am number one in the world in something, because it was the first time in the history of the organization that someone had made it to that level and yet still been disqualified. So it's not something I'm exactly proud of, but it's reality, right? We're not going to win every time. And the people know that. So take a chance and share some vulnerabilities with them. If you're always talking about yourself and every image is of yourself, and all the graphics and illustrations that you use point to your company, your product, your service, it's probably going to cause them to disconnect a little bit. I was in a presentation and the person used himself in every image or graphic that he had during his presentation. Unbelievable, right? And it was very obvious because we all talked about it in the audience. And so this is not something that's going to draw people towards you. So you want to be careful of that. In addition to selling constantly through your presentation or your communication. Because unless they have a real problem and you have a real solution to that problem, you don't have a sale. And so if you're doing that prematurely, it's going to cause them once again to disconnect and to disengage. And they'll eventually look like this, right? Which is essentially what happens when you're either overselling from the platform, or if you're in a culture that you don't really understand and you're using some jokes or illustrations, graphics, or in some cases gestures that may be offensive to the audience. I mentioned earlier that I had been to about 12 countries working, and one of these places, we're in Thailand, and if you know anything about the Thai culture, you'll know that they consider feet or the foot to be disrespectful. And so in one case, not only was I seated and pointing my foot at one of the senior managers who had invited us in, but I was also calling him Mr. Foot because I wasn't pronouncing his Thai name correctly. And he was a bit uncomfortable with that. So he would, during one of the breaks, he pulled me to the side and let me know. I had absolutely no idea. And so all I could do was apologize. But not only was I pointing my foot at him, but I was calling him Mr. Foot at the same time. Not a good idea. And he kind of looked a little bit like this when he was telling me that. So you want to be careful of that. This is a global economy that we're in, and we must be sensitive to other cultures and their habits, gestures as well. And there's a book called Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands that you can read if that's something that you're struggling with. Now, here's a solution to that very problem of being a self-centered, self-focused speaker. It's called an audience profile, okay? It's a list of intelligent questions designed to fully understand the audience. And regardless of what that is, their location, their habits, their likes, their problems, their issues, their culture, you must create an audience profile that would look similar to a Facebook profile or a LinkedIn profile. So you should list out all these facts, whatever is relevant to that particular audience. You want to record that. So I literally have a profile, a form that I use. I call it audience profile. Well, I'll put all this relevant information as it relates to why we're meeting. And some things may not be closely related to why we're meeting, but they're imperative to me. Why? Because I want to make sure I'm singing a song that they understand and not just myself. So I spend quite a bit of time of creating this profile, not only from who the players in the room are, who the decision makers are, where they're located, some of the challenges they may have had in the past. I create an audience profile on paper, on purpose, first, before I ever use any electronics. It's one of the biggest challenges we have in communicating and presenting today is people rely too much on the technology and they neglect the most powerful computer on the planet, which is the brain. So create that audience profile and use it to create the foundation for your presentation. Because everything that you speak to them and offer them should be born from the audience profile, and that helps you to make sure you include the right information and, more importantly, eliminate information that should not be there. Here's something else that might help. It's a proverb. It says, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. If you use this audience profile correctly and repeatedly and make it about them, the stories are about them, the illustrations are one that they understand. It's from their perspective and not your own. That's going to take a little bit of work because we naturally gravitate to what we know and what we're comfortable with. But we want them to be comfortable and not ourselves. We have to get uncomfortable so they can become more comfortable. And if we do that successfully, we will hear them praise us and we won't have to praise ourselves. I've seen it work over and over again. It's a critical piece of effective communication as it relates to both business and sales presentations. Hi, my name is Brian Williams. I am the founder of Perspectivity Consulting. That's the end of video number 1. Number 2 will be out to you shortly.